Welcome to the Plant Trainers Podcast, where we're helping people improve their quality of life through nutrition and fitness. And now, your hosts, nutrition and wellness coaches, international speakers, Adam and Shoshana Chaim.
Hey, I'm Adam Chaim.
And I'm Shoshana Chaim, and we are
Propelled by Plants. Today we bring to you episode 204, Your Gut Microbiome and Health with Dr. Chiti Parikh.
Before we get into our summary, we just want to announce our Propelled by Plants t-shirt winner from our contest that we had. We want to thank everybody so much who entered the contest. It really means a lot to us. So if you would like a Propelled by Plants t-shirt, then you need to go to the Plant Trainers shop. That's the PT shop at www.planttrainers.com and order one if you're not the winner today. We're really sorry if you're disappointed, but keep in touch with us and wait until there's another competition coming up really soon. In the meantime, the winner is Katerina1203. We encourage Katerina to please email us at info@planttrainers.com with your mailing details, and we'll get that out to you soon. Okay, here's our summary. In today's episode of the Plant Trainers Podcast, we talked to Dr. Chiti Parikh about microbiome and your health. I first met Dr. Parikh at the New York City Vegetarian Food Festival, and she was talking about one of my favorite topics at the moment, poop. Well, microbiome mostly, but poop came up. So I knew I had to get her on the show to talk about our gut bacteria, how to grow the good, shrink the bad, and maintain the healthiest body possible. You may have heard of TMAO and fecal transplants, so get ready to fully understand what that's all about.
Dr. Parikh is an assistant professor at Weill Cornell Medical College, where she plays an active role in medical education, research, and patient care. She graduated as an AOA scholar from Robert Wood Johnson Medical School and completed her internal medicine residency at New York Presbyterian Weill Cornell Medical Center. As a board-certified internist and diplomate of the American Board of Integrative and Holistic Medicine, she's co-founded Integrative Health at New York Presbyterian Hospital. This program provides services such as acupuncture, meditation, yoga, nutrition, psychotherapy, and biofeedback. As an integrative medicine practitioner, Dr. Parikh focuses on a holistic approach to care that addresses not only physical but also psychological, social, spiritual, and environmental influences on our health. By spending more time with patients, she creates a personalized treatment plan that's tailored to individuals' unique needs and circumstances. By combining cutting-edge innovations of modern medicine with the wisdom of Eastern medicine, she partners with her patients to attain optimal health and wellness.
When I talk to people about meal planning, basically what they're telling me is it sucks. And I know because I've been there. It sucks when you don't know what to make, when your children are running around like crazy, or when you work until late at night and you come home and there's no food made, and then you want to make a recipe and you realize that you don't even have the ingredients and you have to run back to the store. This is what makes life more difficult. Life should be so much simpler. And with our meal planning mastery course, you go through videos one at a time. You have worksheets that you go through that help make meal planning simple. But not only does it make meal planning simple, it saves you time during the week. It helps you navigate the grocery store better. It helps you navigate your life better, and it helps you getting healthy, delicious food on the table in less time. So if that's something that you're interested in, click on the link below in the show notes and get our meal planning mastery course now.
And now for a moment of gratitude.
Today, I'm grateful for the 21-day plant-powered party. The women in this group are doing amazing. They are making meal plans. They are getting their families involved. They're making changes that a year ago or 6 months ago, they never thought that they would have made. And we're actually seeing amazing health issues change, clear up, progress to a much better state, which is something that these participants really didn't expect because it's different than some of the things that we have had before here in the 21-day program. So I'm just so grateful to be going through this with the women, helping them through, and really watching them as they grow.
I had such a great experience a couple weeks ago. You may have seen this posted on our Facebook page. I also posted it in our plant-based health, nutrition, and fitness Facebook group. So if you haven't seen that, check it out. But essentially, the gratitude is that I had an opportunity to run a 5K race with my son. It was his first one, and I ended up pacing him to a third place finish overall in the race, which was just awesome. The other thing I want to share that I'm grateful for is that I was interviewed recently on the No Sitting on the Sideline Dad podcast with Joe Foley, and I really appreciate having that opportunity. And when that podcast comes out, I'll be sure to share that link with everybody on our Facebook page and social media. So check it out.
Dr. Chiti Parikh, thank you so much for being on the Plant Trainers podcast today.
My pleasure.
We're very excited to talk to you today about microbiome and gut and bacteria and all that delicious stuff. Hopefully nobody's eating their lunch. But before we do you have a moment of gratitude that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a little bit out of the blue, but I just want to thank my parents for instilling the idea of plant-based diet from the day I was born. I grew up vegetarian, and I'm so glad I stuck to it. And I thank my, all the people that have come into my life recently, and people like you are doing all this important work to spread that message. And I'm very grateful for being part of this journey. And I feel like I'm connected to more and more people through this, and it just keeps me inspired and keeps me going forward. So I'm very, very grateful for that.
Good. And I'm sure that people are going to be grateful to be aware of you if they don't know you already, and to hear all the great things that you're doing.
I think it's an amazing community that we're building and that we're a part of, and thank you for what you're doing in this community. I also find it interesting that your parents have influenced you in eating this way, because a lot of parents of the older generations, I find, were stuck in the standard American diet and didn't really pass on a plant-based nutrition kind of way of eating to their kids. So it's a very interesting perspective to get from you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did grow up in a small town in India, and being vegetarian is not new in certain parts of India. But even at that time, the reasons why my parents raised me that way wasn't just for religious reason or anything like that. It was more about compassion. It was more about science, and it was more about impact on the environment. So they were certainly ahead of their times, and just my upbringing in general has been very sort of new age. I always tell people I learned to meditate before I learned to walk through my parents. So I'm so grateful that I had that opportunity, and those seeds were planted at such a younger age, that I'm able to benefit from it now.
I think it's also a good message, because a lot of people will say to us, well, what happens when your children are teenagers and they choose to eat whatever they want? Or some of our clients will say, well, what do I do about my children? How do I make sure that they never eat a piece of cheese again, or they never eat a hot dog again? And it really comes back to values and teaching in different ways, and reaching your children the way that you understand that they need to be reached, but also just letting go of that and letting them find their own way and find their own path. And they might veer off it for a while, but if it's been instilled in them, then they'll come back.
Absolutely. That's a very good point.
So let's get into our gut. And I mean, so many people will say, I could feel it in my gut when something bad is going to happen. Or we say my gut's all messed up when your stomach's kind of not good. So let's help people understand what exactly the gut is.
Yeah, so when we talk about the gut, it's really the connection. Anyway, it starts from the mouth to the anus. So everything in between, as the food passes through, is called the gut, or the alimentary canal, or the gastrointestinal system. So all these words mean pretty much the same thing. And we talk about the gut microbiome is referring to the microbiome, or the family of bacteria or yeast that are in our gut. But when you talk about just microbiome, that's the total amount of microorganisms that are in or on top of our body. So we obviously are covered with bacteria in our skin, also in the vaginal canal, in our nose. So almost every orifice and the surface of our body is covered with microorganisms. When you put all that together, that is our individual microbiome. And a special focus has been given to the gut and the healthy bacteria and the not so healthy bacteria in the recent years, because a lot of research has focused on it. But I do want to tell you that the research is expanding to look at even our skin microbiome and how that plays a role on, increasing reasons for people to get allergies, also increasing risk of dermatitis, psoriasis, all of these skin conditions. So the gut microbiome research is rapidly expanding, and we're learning so much more about what these tiny little guys and gals do for us. So a lot more to come.
So the microbiome that you could find in these other orifices throughout the body, is it the same? Is it connected to the microbiome that we find inside the gut as well?
Absolutely. It's all connected because the exposures that we get, let's say if we take an antibiotic, it is not only affecting our gut, but the rest of our body because the antibiotic permeates through the blood vessels throughout the body. So whether you have, an eye infection, ear infection, or urine infection or diarrhea, the antibiotic is going to work on all of these things and alter the microbiome in every single part of your body. So we need to be mindful of its impact throughout the body, not just focusing on the gut. But obviously the gut microbiome is the largest space and something we know the most about. So that's what the attention really goes.
So how new is this research? Because I could tell you that if I asked my parents if they heard anything about gut microbiome or taking probiotics or things like that when I was a little kid and they were younger, they would say they never heard of any things like this. So is this like a new trend? Is the research really new on this stuff?
It is. I would say the concept of gut microbiome is not new. So when you think about Ayurveda or traditional Chinese medicine, they knew that from thousands of years ago that all the diseases essentially start in the gut. So Ayurveda is very much focused on treatments that are related to either food or giving treatment through the gut or even through enema. So that's what Ayurveda embraces. Traditional Chinese medicine, when you talk about most of the important meridians that we work on, are also focused on the GI system. So this is by no means a new concept, but the Western medicine research has really been blossoming over the last 10 years. And one of the reasons why that has happened is because of resistant infections that we see nowadays in the hospitals. So sometimes we end up seeing infections in the hospital that are antibiotic, everything we have in our toolkit with the antibiotics are not able to tackle. So that is what led to the focus on, okay, what are the good bacteria and how does killing them off through antibiotic giving rise to even more resistant bacteria? So that's one of the sources of the research. But as we got into it, we learned that these bacteria are doing a lot more for us than we understood. And I think it paralleled the trend where the genetic revolution was also happening in research. We sequenced our genome and realized that a grape has more genes than we do. So that baffled the scientists to figure out how come we're not genetically superior just by the number of genes. So clearly we're getting help from somewhere to run this very complex machine. So I think it was a lot of different things that came together that brought the attention to the microbiome and how it impacts health and disease.
So how does our good microbiome help us?
So the microbiome, basically, there's several different ways that it protects us and helps us. First of all, it has a barrier effect where actual trillions and trillions of bacteria form almost a coating in our gut to protect us from other, toxins. So that's the first thing, is the barrier effect. Second thing, it also modulates our immune system by increasing or decreasing different immune modulator molecules. So that's another thing. The third thing is it changes our hormone levels. It affects hormones from estrogen, progesterone, to things like cortisol, even neurotransmitters like serotonin. A lot of these things are produced or broken down or modified by the gut microbiome. And the fourth thing is the elimination or detoxification. So whatever toxins we're exposed to, or even some of the medications that we take, are broken down or detoxified by the gut microbiome. So if you don't have the right bacteria, what happens is the toxic effect of all these drugs or the toxins continue to permeate throughout the body and causes, chronic inflammation. So they're doing almost a little bit of everything, all the housekeeping chores for us. And we'll learn more and more about how they change our metabolism, how they affect our immunity, how they can actually cause formation of cancer or prevent cancer depending on what type of bacteria we have. So the effect of what the bacteria do is really far-reaching and not just one process, but pretty much every system in our body is affected by it.
So if you take someone who's had a very good diet growing up, maybe ate a lot of organic or organic type foods, right? Maybe not certified organic, but organic type foods, wasn't on a lot of medications, didn't take a lot of antibiotics, and had a really good upbringing, would their chances of developing or having symptoms of autoimmune diseases like Crohn's, colitis, arthritis, would they be would they have a better chance at not having these diseases?
They would. So a lot of research has shown that the more antibiotics you get, even before age 7, can significantly increase your risk of getting diabetes and even being obese. So just within the first 7 years, more than 3 to 4 courses of antibiotic, which a lot of kids get that much in a year, if not more, right?
So why are doctors doing that?
Because unfortunately, everyone is trained, and this is what the belief was all the time, that infection needs to be treated by antibiotics. That is the only tool we had. And also our immune system continues to go down. So the more antibiotics we're exposed to, it's almost that we end up getting more infections and needing more antibiotics. So almost like a vicious circle. So, and the awareness of how dangerous the antibiotic, or actually the frivolous use of antibiotics, I should say, the impact of it is really being understood in the last 10 years as we see a lot more resistant bacteria.
I was on antibiotics from, I think my parents said I cried till I was 3 weeks old, and finally they took me to the doctor, and I had ear infections. And I had ear infections straight through until my mid-20s, and most of the time it was perforated ears. So at that point, I mean, I don't know what else they could have done for me, but put me on antibiotics because I was so far gone every time. But
exactly.
Yeah, so
that's exactly what happens. It's like once you get an infection, you take antibiotics, and next time you get the infection, it tends to be harder to treat and becomes more resistant. So now you need even bigger guns, and you can't give up at that point. You can't say, oh, now I'm not going to take antibiotics, I'm going to treat it with probiotics. That's not a safe option. So it's almost like you're chasing your tail in sometimes.
So what we've got to do with our young ones is we've got to be even more proactive and do as much as we can to keep them healthy and to keep them from needing those antibiotics.
Exactly.
How does somebody know if they have good gut bacteria or bad gut bacteria? Is there a way to figure that out?
Yeah, so there's obviously fancy stool tests and things we can do, but the most important thing I tell patients is, learn to listen to your body, because that is always the best tool that goes with you. You don't have to depend on another doctor or fancy tests to tell you what's going on in your body. So developing that sense of awareness day to day, what our body feels like, what are the small changes, you're able to detect imbalances a lot before, way before than the blood test or stool test would be able to. So thinking about, over your energy level, what are your bowel movements? Are you going to the bathroom every day? What do your bowel movements look like? What does your tongue feel like? What is your morning breath like? What does your sweat smell like? Urine smell like? So these are really the things, when you think about ancient traditions of medicines in Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine, that's how you assessed a patient. You didn't have blood tests or anything like that. So they would ask about your bowel movements, or ask about what your urine looks like, smells like, your breath. They would look at your pulse. Your tongue is such a vital organ when it comes to diagnoses, right?
I love when doctors, sorry to interrupt, I love when doctors look at the tongue and they know everything that's going on in the body. It's like the weirdest thing.
Stanley does that. Our acupuncturist does that. He's like, open up, and then open the tongue. He's like, oh, you're doing well this week. And then the next week he's like, oh, what did you do?
It's like the craziest thing.
But it's amazing that Western medicine has no concept of that. So just by pulse and tongue, the ancient traditions must have had something right, because in Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine, it's the same concept. Even though they are thousands of miles apart, it's the same exact mode of diagnoses to this day, right? It's just fascinating how they had a much better grasp of what was going on in our body than we do with all our fancy testing.
So if somebody's feeling really fatigued all the time, is that an indication that their gut bacteria is probably not doing what it's supposed to do?
It could definitely be one of the components. I mean, again, there are so many reasons for someone to be fatigued, right? So it's important to think about all the factors. That's why I know my body best, right? So I know that I need 7 hours of sleep. Otherwise, I'm going to be fatigued. Otherwise, I'm going to be cranky. Otherwise, I'm going to be eating bad food. So I need to know what my triggers are. I need to know, there are a lot of my patients who have no idea what their stool looks like, what their urine looks like. They just don't pay attention. So these are the things that we have to learn to really get to know ourselves better and to understand the patterns, understand what's normal and what's abnormal for us, rather than some standard that might not really fit you.
So if we're allowing our bad bacteria to grow too big, and at the end we'll talk about the things that we can do to grow our good bacteria and destroy our bad bacteria. But what is this bad bacteria related to TMAO?
So TMAO is just one product that bad bacteria can produce. And I just want to preface all of this by saying This is such a new evolving field, and you will never hear many doctors or scientists admit to this, but we really don't know much. We know very little. There's so much more. There's a lot more complexity and finesse and elegance to how all these systems work together. We're just scratching the surface. So TMAO is just one molecule that we identified that the bad bacteria can make that leads to building of plaque in the arteries and leads to increased risk of cardiovascular disease. But we don't know all the other molecules and things that we can in the future detect to understand the impact of the good and bad bacteria in our health. So that's just one example.
So it could be that there's a connection between if we're eating good foods and we're feeding our good bacteria, our bodies are in good shape. But if we're eating more carcinogenic, more fried foods, and we're feeding our bad bacteria, that TMAO causing the plaque in our arteries can also be coming from other places at the same time.
Exactly. So it all comes down to, people saying, how do I get good bacteria in my gut? It's what the trap we fall into is the typical, every pill for every ill has a pill, right? So we always fall into the trap that, I don't know if I have good bacteria, bad bacteria, but why don't I just take a probiotic and I'm done? And we don't pay attention to all the other things that promote growth of good bacteria. And these are living, breathing things. So the analogy I gave at the talk, and I'll give again, is, if you want a beautiful summer garden, you can spend a lot of money buying the best seeds, organic, non-GMO, and you throw them in your backyard and you come back 3 months later, you're not going to have a bumper crop. You're going to have just nothing, essentially, right? So these are living, breathing things. They need food, they need air, they need water, they need sunshine, and same thing with the bacteria. They need the right type of things to survive. So if you want the good bacteria to grow, you got to feed them what the good bacteria like, which is often the healthy things, right? If you feed them French fries and hamburgers and ice cream all day, then the bad bacteria will grow. So what grows is purely determined by what we bring in for them. So that's the most important piece. It's not the type of probiotic. It's not the type of, all the other supplements you can take. It's really what you're eating on a day-to-day basis. And our gut microbiome evolves and it's very dynamic. Each meal is essentially an opportunity to change it. It's not something you're destined. It's not your genes, but okay, I was born with this, so now I can't do anything to change it. Every single meal is an opportunity to support or harm your gut microbiome.
Does the microbiome only get fed from the food that we consume? Does our sleep patterns, does the exercise, does anything else we do have an impact on that microbiome?
Huge impact. So anything when it comes to the GI tract, right? When it comes to diet, how we process the food, how we digest, how we absorb, how we eliminate, all of those things are controlled by the parasympathetic. So our nervous system basically is broken into sympathetic, which is sort of the stress system, and the parasympathetic, which is the rest and relaxation system. So the vagus nerve, which connects from the brain to the diaphragm, is sort of the master of our parasympathetic system, the rest and digest system. So if we want the digestion to be optimal, we really need to be in a state where the digestion is being promoted by our body and being focused on. So even if you have the healthiest meal, right? And if you are sitting, talking to your friends and sitting in a relaxed atmosphere and just enjoying that meal, you'll certainly digest, absorb, and eliminate that meal very differently than if you are just eating the same meal in front of a computer or a TV and kind of typing away at emails and answering phone calls. It's going to be treated very, very differently. So it's very important that the rest of our systems, it's not just what we eat, it's how we eat, where we eat, how are we actually supporting our body, how are we supporting our mind, our spirituality. All of these things work in coherence with one another. You can't just ignore one and expect the best results. You have to pay attention to each and every aspect of it.
Are there specific foods that are good or bad for the microbiome that we know of specifically?
So obviously more processed foods, all these foreign compounds. So anything with a lot of additives, processing, preservatives, it's really foreign to our body, right? So our bodies are not used to seeing that. It's really came into our diet in the last 20 to 40 years. So our body's not used to processing those things. It doesn't know how to eliminate them. And we still don't know how those things affect our health. So the diet that's lowest in processed foods, additives, preservatives, obviously going to be better. More green your diet is, because that's what the good bacteria really like. It's the fiber in our diet that our body doesn't really use, but ends up becoming food for the bacteria. So anything that's very high in fiber, lots of whole grains, lots of plants, fruits, vegetables, whatever you can think of, that is going to be natural directly from Mother Nature is always going to be way better, because our bodies are used to, over hundreds and thousands of years, we've evolved to be able to digest these things and absorb and eliminate these things, not like the Dunkin' donuts or Little Debbie cakes.
So if somebody spent the first part of their life on antibiotics, eating fast food, running around while they're eating all their meals in front of television, and really doesn't have good gut microbiome happening around the body, is just changing the diet enough? Or are some people in a serious situation where they need other events to happen too, like a probiotic or something else?
Mm-hmm. Especially if you have chronic conditions, and if you've been on multiple antibiotics and you're sick right now, you would need probiotics to help you while you're doing all the other changes. But to sustain those probiotics, the other changes must happen simultaneously. Otherwise, you're just making expensive poop, right? So you have to do both of those things together.
So someone with IBS or diarrhea or uncontrollable bowels or all those other kinds of things, taking a probiotic to help the good bacteria grow, but also changing their sleeping patterns, changing their eating patterns from what they eat to how they eat, this should be enough to help support them make changes.
Yes, it can. And if it's not enough, then it's often because something else might be going undiagnosed. So that's when, if you're sick and if you're doing all these things, you're not seeing results, then that is when stool testing or blood testing and things like that can add extra layer of information to take a deeper dive on what's going on.
So can somebody walk into Whole Foods and just say, I need a probiotic, and just take whichever one speaks to them on the shelf? Or is there specific probiotics that people should be taking?
So there are certain aspects that I would consider when I'm picking out a probiotic, because there's just so much in the market nowadays. I always give these talks about how to read a food label, and my number one thing is don't believe anything that's on the front of the label. Always look at the back of the label. So I would say that with the same thing with probiotics. So one of the things is you want diversity. So you want diverse strains, because as we're learning, every strain of bacteria does something slightly different. So you want to tap into that by, at least 5 to 10 different diverse strains, different families of good bacteria. The other thing you want to be mindful of is normally around 10 billion should be suffice. More is not always better. So you want to make sure if you're taking a probiotic supplement, you get around 10 billion colony forming units, so CFUs. And then the next thing is you always want to make sure what else is coming along with your probiotic. So often there are additives, fillers, and things like that. So if you already have a sensitive stomach, and if you take a probiotic and you're getting some, more bloating or gas, I encourage you to look at the fine print, look at the other ingredients, because a lot of them might have things like soy, gluten, or dairy products as additives that might be causing some of your symptoms. So always be mindful of what else is in there besides a probiotic. And also look at the care instructions. Do they want you to refrigerate it? Do they want you to take it at a certain time of the day? Is it acid and bile stable? So all of those things will play a role into how much, how many of the bacteria that are in the capsule are actually getting to where they need to, which is the colon. So you have to be mindful of all of these things.
Should people be scared of constipation by taking
That is
it?
not usually probiotics are not supposed to constipate you. It is supposed to increase your stool bulk. So if you already have tendency for constipation, and if your motility is not very good, then it can increase the stool bulk, and it might not push things forward as well if your motility is low. So there are certainly some instances you might get some constipation, but majority of the time that is not a sort of a side effect of a probiotic.
And then a question that I wanted to ask you at the beginning, gut flora, is that also microbiome? Or is that something completely different? Yeah.
No, it's very similar. It's the same concept. A lot of these terms are used interchangeably.
So am I hearing that if someone's to go on antibiotics, they should be taking a probiotic at the same time?
Yeah, so not at the same time as in during that period, but not at the same exact moment, right? So we want to take the probiotic spaced out as far in between as possible. So at least 4 to 6 hours if possible. That can be challenging with certain antibiotics. You're taking it 4 times a day, then it becomes challenging to time it But in general, most antibiotics are either once a day or twice a day, so you can take the probiotic in between. And definitely continue taking probiotics, at least 2 to 4 weeks afterwards.
So the probiotic doesn't just cancel out the effects of the antibiotic?
No, so basically antibiotic are going to kill off anything, right? So it doesn't discern between the good bacteria and the bad bacteria. It's going to kill everything. What we're trying to do is give the probiotics back a little bit and the good bacteria back a little bit, so that as soon as the effect of the antibiotic wears off, you recolonize with all the good bacteria.
Okay.
So, but wait, before you get into that, so should somebody be taking probiotics all the time, regardless?
No, I do not think so. I think if you have a good diet with all the things that we mentioned, the lifestyle that supports a good gut microbiome, you don't need to take a probiotic. And there are a lot of probiotic foods that you can include in your diet as well. And that's how it's always been. Every culture, if you think about it, has some sort of a probiotic food that they include on a daily basis almost, right? So if you can get it through food, that's obviously much better.
What would be some examples of those foods, like kimchi?
So obviously, kimchi, kefir tend to be the famous ones. In Japanese, where there's some things like natto, even tempeh, a lot of fermented milk products. We call it different things in different cultures, but they tend, or even pickles like sauerkraut and things like that along the line of kimchi can be very beneficial. So there's a lot of foods. So depending on your palate or the type of food that you can access or make, that's something important to include. But by no means you have to take a probiotic every day. I don't believe that. I think it's more important because, again, we don't know everything, right? So the probiotic might only contain 5 or 10 different families of bacteria that until now we've learned about. But there might be so many other strands of bacteria that we have no idea about. So the food is a much better source than just a probiotic because we're still limiting ourselves to a certain degree.
I love hearing you say that because I'd much rather get all my vitamins, minerals, probiotics, whatever I can from the actual food rather than supplementation.
Absolutely.
Okay, so before we let you go, I want to talk about this because when I first heard about it, it blew my mind. Let's talk about fecal transplants. How does it work and what are the benefits?
So fecal transplant, the reason why we came about this therapy is what I was mentioning earlier. In the hospital, every time someone comes in, we give them really, heavy duty antibiotics through the IV. And what we started seeing over the last 10 years is something called a Clostridium difficile infection. So C. diff, the short form, you might have heard of that. So that's a bacteria that we all have in our guts. It's usually not a problem. But when you go through repeated rounds of antibiotic, it kills off all the good bacteria. And the C. diff sort of sticks around because it's harder to kill. And what it does, it takes over. And it can have disastrous, life-threatening effect. It can actually take over and necrotize or almost get a gangrene of your entire colon. And people with really resistant infection of C. diff in the hospital, we actually have to perform urgent surgery and take out their entire colon, or they can die. It's a very serious thing. So when we started noticing more and more infections of the C. diff, we came up with more antibiotics to treat the C. diff, but guess what? It kept coming back. So one of the trials was, okay, how about we bring back the good bacteria? So some of the trials used probiotics. It had some success, but the most resistant form of bacteria or infections were not responding to even good probiotics. So the idea was, what if we took stool from someone with a very healthy diet and very healthy lifestyle, and we take stool from them and we put it into these patients, maybe that will help battle this really resistant infection. That's really how it started. And nowadays, there's actually stool banks, just like blood banks and sperm banks. There's actually stool banks. I think there's one in Boston. They actually have a very strict criteria of the patients or people they take the stool from. They have a very detailed idea what they're eating, what the composition of their diet is, what are the health metrics, and then they donate their stool. I know.
Adam's sitting here shaking his head.
But hey, if anyone's looking for extra income,
yeah.
if you fit this criteria, you might want to look into it. But yeah, this is really what's happening. And there are more and more studies focusing on doing stool transplant for other chronic conditions, looking at MS, looking at things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's to see if that can have an impact. So a lot more coming up. but somehow stool transplant is indeed cutting edge medicine.
I think that's amazing. And it seems quite disgusting. And you're like, well, can they clean it first? But if they cleaned it, then that would take away the purpose, right? The purpose is to get the dirty, right? Like that's what we're looking for.
Exactly. The real deal. And all they do is add water to emulsify it a little bit, and it gets put in, sorry to be graphic.
No,
it
do
gets
it.
put into a big syringe, and it just, through a tube, it just gets pushed into the colon, and the patient stays in that position so that it can kind of stay in for a certain amount of time, and then they go home.
I think when I first heard about it, I think I was watching a nutritionfacts.org video, and I must have rewound like 3 times to make sure that I understood what he had said properly. But I mean, if this is working for people, then great, let it work for people. And if this is grossing people out, then let that be a little extra push to start putting more greens into your diet, putting more fermented foods into your diet, taking care of yourself more so that you don't get into the situation where you need it.
I can't believe this is going on.
I love it.
This seems like blood doping. Like it's almost the same thing, right? Like
same thing, exactly.
I wonder if athletes are going to start using this to improve their overall performance. This is crazy.
It wouldn't be a bad idea. It's still legal, so.
That's great. Shocking.
When are the next Olympics? Yeah.
Oh, man. Wow.
And on that note, we would like to thank you so much for coming on the Plant Trainers podcast. Before we let you go today, do you have any places on the internet or social media where our listeners can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am part of Weill Cornell Presbyterian Hospital here in New York City, and I'm a co-founder of a program called Integrative Health and Wellbeing. And our goal is to bring some of these integrative medicine modalities, through healing through nutrition, through things like acupuncture, mind-body medicine, bringing that into more mainstream healthcare system. So not just that you come in for a surgery or anything like that. If you have back pain, great. If you need surgery, yes, you can, but you can also get acupuncture. You can also learn meditation. We can also help you change your diet. So it's really bringing the best of both worlds, high tech with the high touch, the Eastern, Western, everything together under one roof. That's really what we're doing. So we do see patients, and we're expanding very rapidly. Next year, moving to a 20,000 square feet space in Upper East Side. So a lot more to come. And ultimately, I do think that this is the future of medicine, when we're combining all of this knowledge that we have in one-stop shop. So patients don't have to go confused and have to look up all these things on the internet. They'll be able to actually go to their healthcare providers to not only treat diseases, but also figure out how to promote health and stay healthy.
Well, we think that's really important. Do you have any last actionable tips that you'd like to leave people to stay healthy and have a healthy microbiome?
So 3 things I will say. My first and most favorite thing is meditate. The second thing is make sure you poop every day. And the third thing is make sure you at least have 4 different colors in every meal that you eat. So if you do those 3 things, I think you'll be in a very good shape.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much, Dr. Parikh, for taking the time out of your busy day. We're going to link to your site on our show notes so people could check you out. And we really appreciate you spending time with us. It was a wealth of knowledge. I'm still freaking out about this fecal thing. And my gut bacteria is already making itself better just listening to this conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really been fun talking to you. And I love talking about this and spreading the knowledge. And thanks so much for the work you're doing in dispersing this information all throughout the world.
You too. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Plant Trainers Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or any other podcast listening platforms. We appreciate the feedback we receive from you. Every time we get a 5-star rating or review on iTunes from one of our fans, it ensures other people will find us too. Thanks to our patrons. To become a patron, visit www.patreon.com/planttrainers. Even supporting us with $1 really makes a difference. Connect and follow us on Instagram and Twitter @PlantTrainers. Like Plant Trainers on Facebook, join our newsletter, and check out our website at www.planttrainers.com for awesome plant-based recipes and a list of our services. Email your questions to info@planttrainers.com so we can answer them on our upcoming Facebook Lives. We hope we've inspired you today. Join us again next time and have a healthy day.